Good evening. I am Brother Dr. Jeffrey Sterling, Surgeon General for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and on behalf of our General President, Brother Willis Lonzo III, it's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this evening. I'm quite thrilled about this topic. Those of you that know me, that healthy living is everything that I try to promote and pursue, and I'm very pleased to have this fantastic panel assembled this evening to actually talk about some things that you can take with you that will give you tools to do just that for yourself. I'd like to start by introducing this evening's moderator, Brother Dr. Robert Dansby. It's a very interesting fit for this panel, and I think that you'll understand that as we get into the conversation. But he has broad experience as a senior business executive who specializes in such things as business development, new product, service development and launch, business analysis, and technology development. To that end, he has delivered systems and solutions on health information technologies, telehealth, clinical decision support tools, and online education and training. And as a best practice implementer, he's very keen on helping us identify the things that actually work and drilling down through the things that don't. And that's what tonight's conversation is going to be about. And with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Brother Dr. Dansby to introduce this evening's panel.
Good afternoon, brothers. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to work with the Surgeon General and the Assistant Surgeon General for Family Health in order to bring you information that hopefully will be of use in your management of your health status. In that connection, we have on the panel this evening Dr. Narcisse, who is a physician and surgeon, and Brother Henry, who is a triathlete, former participant in a Ironman competition. And I'll allow each of them to say more about themselves individually. Dr. Narcisse.
Welcome. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana, and that'll become relevant as we go along. Spring 90 initiate of Rho Iota chapter, and I'm currently a member of Alpha Eta Lambda chapter in Houston, Texas.
Brother Henry.
Hi, I'm Brother Henry from St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands. Was made Spring 95 at Rho Chi, now a current member of Mu Lambda in Washington, D.C.
Great, brothers. So without further ado, we'll dive right into the discussion. And for the audience, the purpose of this presentation is to address some of the items associated with healthy aging, to give you information that you can follow up on later. You may have questions as we go through the presentation material. You can feel free to enter questions into the chat or send email to get further follow-up as we move through the sharing of information with you on healthy aging for seniors and others. I'll start by asking Dr. Narcisse if he would define what successful aging is.
We'll go to the next slide. And we'll go over tonight a little bit about how your lifestyle choices affect your health, understand a little bit more about how to engage in healthcare professionals, and also practical steps that you can take. So I think that those are the things we'd like to work on. So successful aging is really how to live well, stay well. And we talk about it in the medical arena as the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being. This is sort of a core function of our lives and the things that we do. We'll go to the next slide. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. And we want to talk a little bit about some of the lifestyle choices. It was Plato that said that the lack of activity destroys the good condition of every human being, while movement and methodological physical and exercise save it and preserve it. So exercise and the effect of healthy choices has been well known to humans for a long time. However, in my hometown of New Orleans, one of my mom's friends was a jazz musician named Ellis Marcellus, and he's well known for saying, in New Orleans, culture doesn't come down from on high, it bubbles up from the street. And that spills over to our diet and our lack of exercise. So I think that I hope that we can speak to both the good choices, speak to the choices that I've made, and how to make better choices than I've made in the past.
Excellent. Brother Henry, could you tell us about your exercise experience?
Sure. I think like most brothers, once you finish school, you settle into your first job, we all have a tendency to just get into a sedentary lifestyle. And as you get older, you get your family, you start working on your career, it's very easy to just, not prioritize your physical activity. And next thing you know, what used to be a fast run or cycle or whatever, now, you have a hard time just going to the garage or, to your mailbox. So that's where I was, just, settle into work, and physical activity just was not an option. So that's when I decided I've got to start making myself and my well-being and my health a priority, and started to exercise. And once I started to exercise, I got the bug. I found something that I enjoyed, and then just continued moving on with it.
Excellent. Next slide, please. Brother Dr. Narcisse, could you tell us about the exercises that you recommend?
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of different kinds of exercises. My work is in geriatric medicine. I specialize in taking care of patients as they get older and towards the end of their lives. And so what a lot of them tell me, what my mother tells me, is that I just can't do the kinds of things that you are talking about when they come and see me. So we try to break down those exercises into a couple of different kinds of things, and we'll talk a little bit more as we go along about some of the recommendations. But endurance exercises, and Brother Henry, you're hearing about someone who's doing a lot of endurance work. I too have been doing a little bit of that on my bike. It's a picture of me wearing my cycling gear and working on things. Aerobic exercise, we always talk to patients about doing about a half an hour of aerobic exercise a day, whether that's walking, that's jogging, that's biking. Some folks can do more high intensity work, and maybe you don't have to do as much. Strengthening is another piece, and whether that's lifting weights or whether that's just carrying the groceries. Resistance bands, there's other things that we need to do, and we can alternate them. The NIH is really the guiding principle around the guiding body that gives us an idea. We'll go to the next slide. And it also talks about a couple of other kinds of exercises that have increasingly been recognized as important for my older patients. Things like Tai Chi, where we're really focusing on balance so that falls don't become such a big issue. And flexibility, so people are doing things like yoga. There's a whole host of those exercises, whether it's the back stretch or the inner thigh stretch, all sorts of crazy poses. But again, all these things are working on flexibility. So it takes all of the components to really work on healthy aging from the geriatric perspective.
Yes, and Brother Henry, what are your thoughts on the subject?
Well, I think one of the things that for older athletes or those who are trying to get into it, especially now as we're living in a pandemic, are chair exercises. Before we thought that was just for older people, but we've been all stuck behind our desk on Zoom calls, meetings, things like that. So, incorporating chair exercises is a great way to mix things up. You can do that. You can do jumping jacks in your chairs, stretches, yoga poses, toe touches. You can even add those resistance bands that were mentioned into it. So, 5 minutes while you're sitting at your desk, taking a break from answering emails, that's an easy way to incorporate it in your day without, trying to find additional time to go out and do something.
Yes, and Dr. Narcisse, how do you propose a brother get started exercising if they are sedentary?
Yeah, I really like a lot of the ideas that Brother Henry has brought forth. The chair exercises is something that I talked to my mother about this very morning. She still said no, but we did talk about it. We talk a lot about warming up, cooling down afterwards. In my Houston and New Orleans climbs, being careful about exercising out in extreme weather is a significant issue. Hydration is something I preach all the time. We have lots of people come to the hospital that are dehydrated and start to have muscle breakdown because of it. So hydrate before, during, after. My older patients don't even feel thirsty sometimes. Maybe even patients that are my age sometimes don't always feel thirsty all the time. So you really have to push the hydration. The appropriate clothing, the appropriate shoes. I'm not talking about wearing Gucci gear and the fanciest outfits, but something that makes sense. And you really need to plan your exercise regimen with a health professional. And in this particular case, Brother Henry serves in that capacity. If you don't have a Brother Henry, I might be able to do, but those are the kinds of things that I think are very, very helpful. And so I really encourage tracking progress. Whether you download just a pencil and paper kind of an activity log, the website that I've listed, it shows the one that the NIH has, or whether you want to do something digital and exotic like Strava or Garmin. Those are the kinds of things that are available to you to keep track of your progress.
Yes, and Brother Henry, why do you think it's so hard for people to get started?
Well, I think what makes it very difficult for you to get started is we all remember our heyday of what we used to could do. And we live in a perpetual mindset of, I remember when I could do this. And unfortunately, whatever age you are when you decide to get back into fitness, you most likely can't do it where you were. So, don't start where you were, start where you are. That's the best way to see progress and move forward. The other thing is, when you're deciding on an activity to do, don't pick something that you should do. Pick something that you want to do. All right. You're all grown. You make good choices in your life. So if you're waking up and saying, I should do this, most likely you probably won't. So when it comes to starting out with an exercise, whatever it is, running, cycling, tennis, whatever it is, it should be something that you want to do so that you're likely to actually go and do it. But if everything you say comes out as, I should do this, at this point in life, the likelihood is you're probably going to avoid it more so than actually go do it. So find something that you want to do and start there.
That sounds like good advice. And after you've started, how do you advance?
So to advance, once you get started, it's really about goal setting. Once you get moving, you start to make various goals of, where do I want to take this? Is this, I want to lower my blood pressure, my cholesterol? Do I want to, lose some weight? Do I just want, a little bit more stamina for, general good use? Once you figure out what kind of goals you want to set for yourself, then you give it an appropriate timeline for you to make it happen. You're not going to get a major goal done in 1 week of exercising. So make sure that your goals are realistic and you give them the appropriate time for you to actually accomplish them. Because you can get there, but just give yourself the appropriate amount of time to make that goal happen.
Yes. And I suppose that as you exercise and you advance, it's important to maintain a nutritional regimen. So could you talk about diets? I know there are a lot of them out there, but Brother Narcisse, could you talk about diets and how they are related?
Sure. We'll go a couple slides ahead, and then we'll talk a little about the diets that we end up recommending the most in geriatric and internal medicine. The plant-based diets have been very, very popular. Lots of people come in and ask us about that. The ones we've traditionally recommended is called the DASH, which is Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And that's all the things that you probably can guess at: vegetables, fruits, whole grains, fish, poultry, vegetable oils, and avoiding sodium. Means anything from a box, anything from a can, anything from the freezer. All those have lots of sodium. Sweets, anything that I like to eat. Sugary things, anything that my mom liked to cook for me. Beverages, anything I liked to drink when I was growing up. And red meat, that's just that. Mediterranean diet, again, another diet approach that takes a limitation to the red meat and emphasizes grains, fruits, vegetables. Those are the things that we really find very, very helpful. So whether it's fruits, vegetables, avoidance of the things that everybody already knows what to do. And the American Heart Association, I'd like to give a quick shout out to them, has a nice primer on cooking skills. One of the things that I find is that even in my New Orleans, where food is so integral to our lives, boys are not taught to cook as frequently as girls are. And so my cooking skills have come a long way with the guidance of my mom and my grandmother, but they're nowhere near as good as my sisters. And so for those of you who didn't get a lot of support from your parents and grandparents on how to cook, the American Heart Association has a number of recipes and cooking recommendations while you're trying to learn how to do that, because all the diets with a name on them, they all come down to the same thing. You have to put in the work. And if you're expecting it to be fast, frozen, and microwavable, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah. And Brother Henry, what are your thoughts on the subject, given your experience as a coach?
Well, I think with nutrition, you have to, when it comes to exercising, you've got to fuel the machine. So you've got, you put good things in, you're going to get good things out. If you put junk in, you're going to get junk out. So when you start to exercise, if you just start to listen to your body, you'll start noticing that you have a desire for, more healthier foods. You'll notice that I can't perform on those athletic activities the same way if you're eating terribly. So, you will start to navigate appropriate nutritional sources for you so that you can actually perform and get the physical output that you're looking for. So just tie that in. It's hard to make changes overnight. So just gradually do it. If you try to cut everything out tomorrow night or in one day, it may last a day or two, but really it needs to be a lifestyle change. So allow yourself some time to gradually weed yourself off of certain things that aren't good for you, that don't contribute to you doing well in your athletic performances.
Understood.
Agreed.
And just to sync up on things, did we miss a slide?
No. We're going to the next one.
Discussing the NOLA diet?
Yeah, we'll get to it. So I agree with Brother Henry, and the diets that are high in protein are really helpful for folks who are trying to build muscle. And if you look at individuals who are trying to really enhance their lower limb performance because they don't want to fall or because they want to ride a cycle, those are the things that can be very, very helpful. One of the things that's very controversial in my space is how much protein supplementation should you do? And there is some evidence that if you don't go overboard, you can reduce complications and hospital readmissions with protein supplements. But people have tried to sell you on the idea that it will help your cognitive health, your brain health, and prevent Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't work. It has some effect on depression, but not a slam dunk. So those are things that one should really think about. The other thing that we're starting to do, and we're going to get to a little bit more, is how much should you eat? And this is something that is a challenge when you grow up in New Orleans and all of your social activities are centered around food. All of your family activities are centered around food. All of your work activities are centered around food. So one of the things that we're starting to look at a lot more is that of calorie restriction. And in some cases, people have been able to reduce their calorie intake by a quarter without really having a detrimental effect on their nutritional health. And at least in animals, it's not as clear in humans. In animals, it seems like it extends lifespan. So I think that's something that people have been looking at. Additionally, people have looked at benefits to blood pressure and cholesterol as part of an overall pattern of cardiovascular risk reduction. So I think that there are a lot of things to do, but I think starting with simple things is probably what works best.
Understood. Yeah, and Brother Henry, your thoughts on the NOLA diet?
So I want to share this part.
You familiar with the NOLA diet?
Let me explain. On the left is my lunch today.
Okay.
In the middle is what I would have wanted to have had for lunch 2 years ago. And on the right is what I'm having for dinner. And I wanted to get Brother Henry's thoughts on the three, and if there are any opportunities for improvement even from that.
So I think there's always room for improvement, no matter where you are and where you're starting. It just depends on where you are in your journey. So the fact that we've got 3 different phases of how you've progressed with your nutritional planning is a great sign, especially from the center one all the way to the one on the end. So I think it's a matter of just making good choices. Proteins are great, but you also got to make sure it's well balanced, so you have some carbs. If you're going to be exercising, the carbs are what you're going to use for that short-term exercising. The question comes into play of where are you getting, what's the source of that? Are you eating candy bars and things that are high and dense in calorie count, but nothing else? Whereas you can still get some nutritional value from something like a fruit that gives you that sugar and those carbs, but it doesn't have as many calories in there, but you still get that full feeling. We've been so conditioned to have those dense calories that all of a sudden your calorie count goes through the roof and you're still hungry because it was just so condensed. So I think it's just a matter of making sure it's well balanced with your carbs, your proteins, your good fats, and then giving yourself some healthier options. And with yours, I think you're moving in the right direction.
Is it a good idea to have all 3 along with a lot of water?
All 3 as in protein, carbs, and good fats? Absolutely.
Yeah, all 3 of the pictured items.
Again, depending on where you are on your journey, any of those may be good choices compared to some other choices you could have made. You have to pick a better choice for you than what you started with.
Yeah, and we don't want brothers having to see a professional partner out of sync. It would be good to share some advice on how individuals can process all of the information being received via the web and broadcast TV and cable with regards to health advice, and how one can find a professional partner or partners to assist in their healthcare journey. Yeah. Brother Doctor?
Yes. I would definitely recommend connecting with Brother Henry or someone serving in Brother Henry's role in your local community. But there's not a week that goes by that I don't get asked to help someone find a physician in their community. And for brothers, it's frequent that they're looking for someone who is culturally sensitive, someone who understands their considerations. In ideal world, someone who's a brother themselves, but if not, at least someone who can understand. And so if you don't have a word of mouth partner from your chapter that you can find, one of the places to seek is the National Medicine Association. So that is our equivalent to the American Medical Association when the American Medical Association had a different policy about participation. So we do have, and a number of our leadership in Alpha Phi Alpha have connected with National Medicine Association in the past. In Houston, we have the Houston Medical Forum. Everyone has a Facebook group that they connect up with. And I think that those are some good places to start trying to find folks. And in terms of primary care, you're looking for either an internal medicine physician, as I am, a family practice physician, or a geriatric medicine physician, which another role that I serve. The geriatrics can do a complete geriatric assessment. It's a very, very comprehensive, head to toe, soup to nuts kind of a thing, but not everybody needs that. And at least connecting with a primary care physician is something that everybody who has crossed the burning sands probably needs to have access to. We'll go to the next slide. What kinds of things
could you speak about cardiovascular disease and what advice a brother might expect to receive from healthcare partners?
We'll talk a little bit more about this in more detail next week, but I wanted to make sure that everyone has heard and remembers some of the goals of cardiovascular prevention. For blood pressure, we're looking for a blood pressure of 120/80 or less. For cholesterol, we're looking for a total cholesterol less than 200. The bad cholesterol less than 130 if you have no risk factors. But if you've had heart disease or strokes, that number might be less than 70. Your good cholesterol, the HDL, we'd like it to be over 100 over 45. 45. That goes up with exercise. So go see Brother Henry. Triglycerides, you want that less than 150. Again, you can't eat the food in the middle picture if you're going to get the cholesterol and the triglycerides in that level. For diabetes, we want that hemoglobin A1C. It's actually less than 5.7. Over 5.7 is the definition of diabetes. We want your body mass index. It's over when you're over 25. It's obese. You don't want to you want to avoid tobacco altogether. Exercise, food intake, we've been talking about. We'll go to the next slide.
What cancer screening assessments should a brother take advantage of?
Yeah, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. My own father, my own grandfather died of cancer. And I suspect that as you talk to your family members, a number of us have been touched by cancer. For those in the 45 to 50 range, we really talk about prostate cancer screening and colorectal cancer screening. So that's the colonoscopy. You might need a digital rectal exam. You might need a prostate specific antigen study to evaluate for those. If you're over the age of 50, pretty much the same things. You might even need to add the lung cancer screening if you've used tobacco in the past. And these are all the recommendations of the American Cancer Society. So I think that there are a number of things that you need to do and other things you need to look at to try to identify cancer early when it's most treatable and you're most likely to have the good outcome. And of course, you've heard it many times. Our community is more likely to experience negative outcomes from these cancers. And so we really need brothers to connect with their healthcare professionals and begin the screening at a really early age, and earlier than most of us really typically would do.
In the last year, we've heard a lot about vaccinations and vaccines. What vaccination should a brother have had as of this date? And have vaccines helped to reduce and eliminate disease?
So the story of vaccines is actually more than just COVID-19. We're actually beginning flu season. And I got an email yesterday to remind me that it's time for me to set up my influenza vaccine. That's an every year thing to do. The flu that's in the community can be a number of different types. And so the vaccine tries to address that. But there are other vaccines to think about. My mother got her pneumococcus vaccine yesterday, and that's something that we need to do at least once, and you might need to do several times depending on your risk. It may need to be done more than twice. Tetanus, diphtheria is one that everyone thinks about when you step on a rusty nail and probably don't think about much otherwise. Human papillomavirus is a relatively newer vaccine. If you have teenage kids, you may have a pediatrician who's been talking to them about that, but increasingly we're offering that to older individuals because it is a virus that leads to a sexually transmitted cancer. Never before have I said that, a sexually transmitted cancer. And you can avoid that if you've been appropriately vaccinated. Varicella and zoster are two flavors of chickenpox and shingles. People have heard about those. If you went to college, when I did, you had to get a meningococcal vaccine to make sure you didn't get a meningitis. Hepatitis B is something that you have to get in a number of workspaces where you're high risk for contact with bloodborne pathogens. COVID vaccine is a whole nother concept, whole nother topic. More to come about that. We'll get to it, but we've talked about it in the past. We will have an upcoming session to give you an update on COVID. So be prepared for that. Now, one of the questions that I did have, I just left the bedside of a patient with COVID, and she said she's not taking the vaccine because it doesn't help anybody. And I remind people, for all those people out there in the audience who've been affected by polio, by smallpox, probably not that many. I had chickenpox when I was a kid. My children have not had chickenpox. Measles, mumps, rubella, those are things that when the kids get vaccinated, adults don't get complications with that. Tetanus, we talked about, something we need to get regularly, but if you keep it up to date, I haven't seen somebody walk into my emergency room with lockjaw, the complication you get with tetanus, or in my whole career. Hepatitis A and B, if you get vaccinated, I've never had a patient who had the vaccines who walked into my emergency room with those problems. Haemophilus, pertussis, rotavirus, diphtheria, these are all things that we see that we never get to see if patients have been appropriately vaccinated. So I think COVID is our newest example, but we have a long-standing history in our country of kids needing vaccines to go to school, to go to college, in some cases to go to certain places of employment. And as we look at what we should do and what the position of Alpha Phi Alpha should be, and we as Alpha men, I encourage each and every one of you to get vaccinated for COVID-19, complete the series, and more to come about whether you need additional vaccines in the future.
Thank you. Could you say a few words about the diseases that uniquely affect our seniors?
So I'm a geriatrician as well as an internist, and there are a couple of things that we see, and I wanted to just mention, while we're really focused tonight about healthy aging and the kinds of things that we can do when we're younger to avoid complications, the things that are in the future, if you haven't had a healthy lifestyle, that sometimes we can do something about, include dementia, which is a problem with memory, thinking, and judgment. Everyone knows about Alzheimer's disease. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Depression is something that we see very, very commonly in my older patients. I had a long conversation with a patient today about how to get help and whether she needs to start medicines or whether she needs to go to therapy or whether she's going to just do what she's doing. Delirium is something that comes into my hospital all the time, where patients get very, very confused. And because of very small things, they could have a small infection in their bladder and their lungs and their throat, and they get confused and they get potentially even very agitated and violent. So those are the kinds of things that we really want to make sure people are increasingly aware of. Incontinence is something that no one likes to talk about, much less deal with, but it's very common after having complications of prostate cancer. And even without prostate cancer, incontinence and changes in your urinary stream is something that we see very commonly in our older patients. Falls, I have a patient in the hospital right now who I saw about an hour ago who experienced a fall and broke several bones in her pelvis. This is something that great exercise and increasing work around balance and Tai Chi and the strengthening things that you heard from Brother Henry are things that we believe can be very, very helpful. And when you have all of these problems, whether you can define it in a single word or not, I think everyone knows what someone who's frail looks like. I think of my grandmother, particularly as she aged and closer and closer to her death. So these are complications that build up over time. And I believe that many of the healthy aging activities that we have talked about thus far are very, very helpful and very, very useful in staving off this, or at the minimum, having them made manifest later and later and later in life.
Thank you. As we look back over this session, I think it'd be helpful for the brothers in the audience to have a summary from each of you on key takeaways from this conversation today. So if each of you could give a short synopsis of the key points that you would have the brothers take away, I think that would be useful.
Sure, I'll go first. Again, I see patients that have in my hospital who've had complications, who've had problems with their memory, thinking, judgment, who've had falls and fractures, who have cardiovascular disease, who have cancer. And I think that whether it's control of your blood pressure, your diabetes, your cholesterol, enhancing your exercise, working on your diet, maintaining your social connections, avoiding head trauma, good diet. These are things that you can do that will have a positive effect on your ability to avoid disease later in life. So I encourage each one of you to make an investment early so that you might pay dividends later. I'm a newbie. You hear in Brother Henry, someone who's an expert. I'm a person who, before the pandemic, was on the couch all the time, working, family, kids. That's what I did. Never paid myself off with exercise. Now I've gotten on my bike. I've started to do exercises. I'm 1,700 miles down the road on my bike. It's a beginning. I have a long way to go. My diet, long way to go. But with the kinds of advice that you've heard from Brother Henry and with the support of Brother Dansby, I think that there's there's hope for even me.
Brother Henry?
So I would encourage brothers to just start where you are. What if that's just getting off the couch and starting to walk around your neighborhood? The goal is you just want to get up and start moving. I want you to figure out exactly what kind of activity you would want to do versus what you should do, and start there. Even if you don't know what would make you happy, just try something. Because again, what you did in your younger days, you may not, find enjoyment with them now. So you may have to find a new hobby that motivates you. As you get started, just start to make better nutritional choices. Make a schedule, plan it out, and decide, is that a good, healthy option for me? And just do it one day at a time. I'm not expecting lifelong change in one day, but each day just make a better choice and then start to set some physical and nutrition goals for yourself that are realistic and allow yourself enough time to achieve them.
We'd like to take some time to address questions from the audience.
Can I just have one moment,
that?
Brother Dansby? I wanted to just go to the slide one before that one, and just give a quick plug. Again, I know that there are a number of brothers who are still not decided about COVID vaccination. Alpha Phi Alpha has partnered with Simcoe and Altus Hospitals. Here in Houston, we're doing vaccination activities. This partnership is doing vaccination activities across the country. I think that this is something that's very, very important to consider for you and for your family members. Essentially, everyone in the population over the age of 12 is eligible. We're going to start talking about whether folks need additional vaccinations and boosters as we go along, but do think about your COVID vaccination. I have a patient in the hospital who is on the verge of dying this evening. I admitted a person to the hospital, and within the hour before we started this conversation, I need to go see her again. This is something that's so important and so near and dear to my heart. I'm very, very grateful to Alpha Phi Alpha for taking a leadership role in trying to encourage vaccinations across the community and partnering with these outstanding organizations.
That's very, very helpful. Sorry, I missed that one.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah, so shall we transition to questions at this point?
I'll take that one.
Go ahead.
The question is, how important is warming up and cooling down? Is this just a preference, or is there an actual benefit? Yes, you actually need to warm up and cool down. Now, when you are in your teens, it's relative. You can bounce back from lots of things, but depending on the sport, you still need to warm up and cool down. As you get older, you absolutely need to warm up and cool down. You can't just jump out and start doing whatever activity that is, or you may find yourself injured, tearing muscles, or being sidelined for several days. Again, so when you start to exercise, you may notice that your warm up and your cool down is probably longer than the actual exercise. And for those of us who are above 40, you'll notice that you need even longer time to warm up for whatever activity you're doing. So for example, if you're going out for a bike ride and it's an hour bike ride, you may need 10, 15, 20 minutes of warm-up time before you really start to feel your groove and you can go for it. Then after you do your ride, you'll probably need another 10 or 15 minutes of cool down, just so that you can work out the lactic acid that was built up, and so that it doesn't linger and negatively impact you the next day. So yes, absolutely, you need to take some time to warm up and cool down so that your body knows exactly what it's gearing up for.
How does DASH work for younger brothers?
I can take that.
All right.
Again, I have always practiced medicine. I'm now almost 20 years in medicine with a do what I say, not what I do approach. And that's something that I've been working on of late. What we see is that the diets that avoid sodium, that avoid sugar, that avoid heavy fats are the same kinds of diets that really support a healthy lifestyle. And so I think that someone that comes to me in their 50s and 60s and 70s that we're trying to control their blood pressure, well, we're talking to them about sodium all the time. But I think that we've missed the boat. And the place where we really need to get additional expertise is in the avoidance of the sodium when we're in our 20s and 30s and 40s. I think that that's really the key, because you don't have to come and take the blood pressure medicine if you've been on a great diet all along. And so that's something that we see, and it has a tremendous amount of benefits. But it's not the type of thing that you take the diet, you adjust your diet today, and you get these health benefits tomorrow. This is a 5-10 year accumulation of damage or benefits.
Great. Is there another question?
I saw go ahead.
Which of you would like to take this question about metabolism? and what to do with situations where metabolism is very slow?
Well, I'll start. So if you have a slow metabolism and you can take a look at the type of exercises that you're doing to help with that. So exercises that are going to keep your heart rate a little lower, those will kind of get you into a metabolic rate where you're going to start to burn fat. So, think about your walking exercises, things like that, you're not spiking the heart rate. So if you start to get that metabolism working without the heart rate spiking up, that's where you're going to, start to see those benefits compared to if you were to go out and run and then your heart rate, spikes. You're working in different heart rate zones that are going to, affect your metabolism differently. So if you have if you're older and have a slow metabolism, consider doing walking, and that's going to kind of stoke that fire and get you into right heart rate zones where it's going to help with that metabolism to fire it up. And again, when you're exercising, that fat burning metabolism is still going. That engine is still running even after the exercise is over. So it doesn't just stop when you stop moving. It continues on throughout the day.
Great. Another question? Is there another question? The next question is about the Delta variant.
I'll take that one. The question is, how effective will the vaccination strategy be when the viruses are mutating? Okay, sure. I think that's very, very important question. I think that the current vaccination strategy will work best when the entire population of the world is vaccinated at one time. Again, it was designed against what we now call the alpha variant of the COVID-19. And as we take a longer and longer and longer and longer period of time to get everyone vaccinated, it will provide new opportunities for new variants to come to the forth. And I worry that eventually the virus is going to find a way to mutate into a variant that will defeat our current vaccination strategy, and then we'll have to go back and do something all over and start from scratch. So again, our vaccination strategy depends on not just you, but everyone in your community getting vaccinated. So when I talk to people about getting vaccinated, I'm vaccinated. Everyone who's in my family, my immediate family who's eligible has been vaccinated. But I need to go and convince more people. I need to convince the lady who's in the emergency room now that she needs to get vaccinated. I need to convince the folks who don't even come to my office or to my hospital that they need to get vaccinated. And so we're very, very passionate, and I'm very, very proud. Brother Sterling, our Surgeon General, has taken a lead role in the Houston community around the country in this regard. So it's critically important. The time is of the essence. We have to move with all due haste. How long do we have? I don't know. But the longer we wait, the more challenges we'll have with our strategy.
Yes. There's one more question. I understand. What are proper weight gain methods to manage weight and metabolism?
So for your weight gain, I'm going to take it that you're trying to build muscle versus anything else. So one of the things you want to consider is what's actually your metabolic count. What's your daily caloric intake? How many calories do you need just to function properly? So you may not be taking in enough calories to do the activities that you're currently doing. So I would suggest figuring out how many calories you're taking in, and then, or how much you need, and what you're taking in, and then you just have to add a little bit more calories on top of that. If you're building muscle, you probably want to add more protein to your nutrition plan, because I'm taking it that you're also doing some sort of strength training as a part of this. So the additional protein that you take in will help towards turning that into muscle because of the strength training that you're adding into the program. But make sure that you get a good sense of, you know, what your daily intake requirements are, as well as what you're actually taking in, to make sure that, you know, you're actually adding in additional calories that you need versus junk calories.
Great. That's the last question that we'll take during this live session, but I would invite every brother in the audience to please contact the Surgeon General or the Assistant Surgeon General for Family Health if you have additional questions. And with that, I'll turn it back to Surgeon General Sterling for closing remarks. You all mute.
Hey, thank you to the panel. You guys have done a phenomenal job providing critical pieces of information. And I'm sure that based on the comments, multiple members of the audience have really taken a lot from what you've had to say. I'd like to end by getting fundamental and really just going back to the beginning. I always like to leave these conversations with tips and approaches that empower you in the quest of transforming the way in which you address your health. So this is what I want you to understand in terms of the concept of healthy aging, because there are a few things we haven't discussed tonight. And if you look at the places in the world where life expectancy is longest, where healthy aging is most likely to occur, there are things that are done, and these represent best practices. And in future conversations, we'll pick up conversations. I thought it might come out in the questions, but there are conversations about antioxidants and about telomere shortening and other such things. But I want to get very fundamental with you guys on things that you can do. And as these things go, if I mention 5 things to you now, there's a continuum from preventive strategies to moderation of sick care or curative care strategies. And an ounce of prevention is always worth than a pound of cure. So number 1, always remember, diet is an essential component of what you do. And we've talked about nutrition. Remember this simple fact: every single thing you put in your mouth is either going to help you or it's going to hurt you. And we like to actually say that diet is 75% of the health conversation, because we talk about toxins all day, every day, but keep it in mind that food can either be medicine or it can be poison, okay? So if you control your diet, then you're going to be more than half of the way there toward not causing the type of cell damage that promotes aging. And that's what aging is, folks, is actually cell death, to the point to where you aren't able to regenerate your cells and thus your tissues in the way in which you may have been able to when you were younger. So diet, keep that in mind. I actually don't talk much about exercise. I like to cast the conversation in terms of activity, because any level of activity actually improves your cardiovascular health. And as the brother said, starting from where you are, you actually can improve your cardiovascular health simply by increasing the amount of activity in which you engage. And there are places around the world that have much longer life expectancies than ours here in the United States that will never see a Peloton machine. So don't think that you have to get extreme in order to do well for yourself. Keep in mind that every single thing you do in terms of activity is actually strengthening your heart and enabling your performance, because the heart simply wants to pump blood around the body and nourish your tissues with the nutrients that it carries. So the stronger your heart through activity, the better off you're going to be. You need to be engaged in toxin avoidance. Now, again, there are toxins everywhere. Anything from too much sun to ingestion of alcohol and cigarettes. Garbage in, garbage out. You don't want your body to represent garbage, folks. So be very mindful and very careful. Yes, we like to talk about everything in moderation, but that's a conversation about quality of life. And yes, every time that you engage in the quality of life conversation, realize that you're cashing a check against the longevity of life part of this conversation. So you get to decide how you want to enjoy your life versus how long you want to live your life. But a surefire way to do both is to really avoid exposure, ingestion, and otherwise accessing toxins. Okay? Now, continuing down the continuum, we've had the conversation. Immunizations really have been amongst the most potent weapons in our defense that we've had. It just makes no sense that And I think it was very well stated. There's so many diseases that physicians these days can't even recognize because they've more or less been obliterated. And this only happens, figuratively speaking, by the development of vaccines that help us fight these things. And we currently are in a situation where we see what happens when we don't effectively fight off diseases. And yes, you should be very concerned about the prospect of the coronavirus that causes COVID-19 mutating beyond our ability to reach it and to stop this pandemic in its tracks. We are equally as likely at this point to see things get worse as we are to see things get better. So stay on top of your recommended immunizations, and that will get you a long way towards staying healthy. You know, I think that the comment may have been made in terms of the sexually transmitted cancer, cervical cancer. We now have a vaccine that can reduce the risk 100%. Cervical cancer can literally be eradicated if we do what needs to be done in terms of vaccinating kids before they begin sexual activity. So immunizations are critically important. Next up is early detection. The sooner you identify disease, the better you're going to be able to reduce the amount of damage that it's causing. Screenings are very important. The purpose of screening is to maintain your health, make adjustments in your lifestyle to produce health, and to identify disease, because once disease hits, you're really having a qualitatively different type of conversation. So screenings, early detection are critically important. And then at the other end of the spectrum is that once you do develop some type of disease or another, you really have to realize that that could either be the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning. It's up to you to do what is recommended to moderate the disease, to eliminate the disease, or to allow the disease to move forward. And those are all decisions that you make with your actions. So be mindful of those things, and the sum total of the way in which you interact with all of these things via the types of tools that have been discussed this evening produces some level of health, produces a quality of life, and produces a longevity of life. I thank you for joining this Surgeon General webinar. Next week, we will be back with you again at the same time talking about cholesterol, what it is, how you manage it, and why you should be concerned about it. So again, thank you as always on behalf of Alpha Phi Alpha, and have a great evening. Good night.